To Luciana Berger. She's the former Labour and Liberal Democrat MP for Liverpool Wavertree. Lovely to see you, Luciana. Thanks for coming into the studio. Let's ask you about the net zero climb down, because you were Shadow Energy and Climate Change Minister for 3 years in the previous administration, let's put it that way. What do you think? Because I'm a bit confused by where Starmer stands on this issue. We haven't really heard much pushback from him on some of the climate announcements that have been made by Rishi Sunak in the week. We've got a briefing into the Sunday papers today that says that your former colleague Ed Miliband, who I know you work really close with on some of his own measures, is a liability for the Labour Party, and that people are getting annoyed with him because he might be costing the Labour Party votes because of his quite hawkish stance on the climate. What do you think?
Well, I think Keir Starmer's been pretty busy this week, holding the government to account. We are, I wouldn't say celebrating, we're acknowledging the year anniversary this weekend of what was a shocking period under the leadership of Liz Truss as Prime Minister, and that disastrous budget, which has resulted in impacting on so many people across the country, whether that's the cost they're incurring with increased mortgages, etc. Some very, very tricky times. So rightly so, as I think the leader of the Labour Party, we've seen him this week deal and contend with that issue being in the city. We've also
been in France and Montreal.
And I was also say also, he's on the international stage, and he's, we can't solve the world's problems as a country by ourselves. And I think it's absolutely right that he's been spending time meeting with leaders, both in Montreal. He was with Macron earlier this week. So I think he's been pretty busy.
I know, but at the same time, do we think that he's perhaps not setting out his strong and staunch opposition to what Rishi Sunak is saying, precisely for the point you've just mentioned, that people are facing really tough times economically. The cost of living crisis is still a thing for people. Energy bills have come down, but we're now into the winter season, and if you're anything like me, you've put your thermostat back up because it's been cold. And therefore, he can't position himself against this because he knows it's saving people money.
Well, first of all, I don't agree with that. I think that, first of all, I think we have heard some very robust proposals from the Labour Party, which are very practical and actually showing what a government can and should be doing to support people with their energy bills. So whether it's the Labour proposal to create GB Energy, that we should be creating energy in this country, we should also be harnessing the natural resources that we have. We're an island, we have wind that blows, we've got tidal power that we should be accessing. We've seen that stall, even just in the past year. We've seen terrible examples of where we haven't seen any sort of offshore energy projects going ahead. So absolutely, we shouldn't be relying on dictators like Putin to determine what we're paying with our energy bills. I welcome the fact that Labour has set out its plan to have a GB Energy, and they've also set out the Warm Homes Plan, which would help millions of households.
Although Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, had to say that their Green Prosperity Plan, which is $28 billion a year on green measures, would have to be delayed because there wasn't enough money. And then people said, well, have you really costed any of this? I mean, there's a suggestion that the Climate Change Act that was introduced by Ed Miliband has cost, at a conservative estimate, about £500 million.
So let's break down all those different elements. I think it's absolutely right that a Shadow Chancellor is being prudent with the economy's finances in the way that we haven't seen from this government. And we are all suffering. I mean, people are now paying on average £220 a year more this year compared to last year on their mortgage costs alone if they're a homeowner. And actually, we have to look at the nation's finances. And Labour doesn't know exactly what it might inherit if they're successful at the general election. But certainly it's right for them to say, our nation's finances are in such dire straits that we need to be responsible. And I think anyone would welcome that, because we haven't seen that fiscal and economic responsibility from this government. And certainly, people are really suffering as a result of that. But what Labour has is that it acknowledges and it rightly recognises the opportunities that it would bring. We need to look at what the jobs are for the future in this country, and whether that's investing in our energy infrastructure or ensuring that we have homes that aren't spending, there are millions of households in this country that are spending money on their energy bills, on electricity and gas, because we have such leaky properties. We have some of the most energy inefficient homes in this country. So for the Prime Minister to say that he's going to delay the energy efficiency targets, what does that mean for the majority of people renting in this country?
But equally, what does it mean for responsible landlords who are saddled with £10,000 to £15,000 bills, which presumably they can only then transfer onto their tenants with higher rents? I mean, has all of this stuff just been rushed too much? Because figures like Ed Miliband have actually become zealots over the climate. They've sort of inherited this kind of Greta Thunberg catastrophe approaching narrative, which is actually not really in sync with the electorate who is saying we care about the planet, but we don't want to have to pay through the nose to do it. Not least, as David Maddock pointed out, that we only account for 1% of global CO2 emissions.
But people are paying for it. People are paying for it at this moment. They've paid, and they've seen it acutely in the past year, where they've had to pay, upwards of £3,000 for some households on energy bills because their homes are so energy inefficient. And our homes are much less energy efficient compared to many other properties, be that residential homes or commercial properties across Europe. And this is something that the government could have contended with. You rightly point out that I was Shadow Minister for Energy and Climate Change back in 2010. I did that role for 3 years. I stood opposite the government that said they were going to do all these things to support homeowners to invest, or landlords. None of that came forward. I wrote countless articles, they're still online. I would welcome anyone to go and read them. It's all come true, where we've now 13 years down the line, we're not in any better position to help households to be able to insulate their properties, and whether that's homeowners themselves, whether that's people living in rented accommodation or social housing, we've got a massive issue. We have 19 million homes at a starting point that could, that desperately need to be better insulated, and then we haven't seen any of that happen. So people are paying today, and they're also paying the higher energy bills because we haven't seen a government invest in our energy security and our energy infrastructure. So we're to rely on foreign gas imports. We've got loads of issues which many people, including myself, pointed out 13 years ago, and we are no further down the line.
You're now on here banging the drum for Labour and Labour policies, which is great. Obviously, you've had quite a political journey. You were driven out of the party under Jeremy Corbyn by anti-Semitism. At one point, you had to have a bodyguard. You were receiving appalling anti-Semitic abuse on social media and in other avenues. Keir Starmer's now come in. We had a segue where you went to the Liberal Democrats during the whole Brexit Remain divide. I know you had a child in that time. The independent group that you joined from Labour then ended up being Change UK. You stood as a Lib Dem in 2019, and now you're back as a Labour Party member. Presumably, then you have confidence that Starmer has cleaned up Labour's act on this, even though we've got inappropriate language used by Diane Abbott when it comes to writing letters to The Guardian. We've also got Jeremy Corbyn and the spectre of him potentially running for Mayor of London. What's your reaction to that?
Well, firstly, on Jeremy Corbyn, I've listened very closely to what Sir Keir Starmer has said and the leadership of the Labour Party, and he has made it very clear there is no future, zero future for Jeremy Corbyn in the Labour Party, and he will not be running as a Labour candidate. Should there be a political future for Jeremy Corbyn at all when you consider the sharing of the anti-Semitic mural, and he denies it, but his tendency towards anti-Semitic tropes, but also supporters who have definitely harboured anti-Semitic views? Oh, I mean, I'm on record on countless occasions being very clear about my position on Jeremy Corbyn. And I think for me what was most acute was when an independent body in this country, the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, carried out an investigation to what happened under his leadership in the Labour Party and found the party to be guilty of breaching the Equality Act, of being perpetrated harassment and intimidation of its Jewish members, and also the fact that under his leadership there was direct political interference in what was going on. So
he shouldn't run for Mayor of London.
Well, let's be very clear, he's not going to be running as a Labour candidate.
No, but should he run at all?
Well,
after these findings?
Well, I mean, there's nothing to stop anyone from running as candidates unless they've got a
breach. Morally, of course he should consider his position. There's loads of Jewish people living in London.
Of course he should, but let's be very clear, he's not going to be running on the Labour ticket.
No,
if he runs as a candidate, he will be as an independent candidate, and he'll be running against the Labour Party, and it's been made very clear that he will not be allowed to run as a Labour candidate, a parliamentary candidate, or any other type of Labour candidate at the next general election or any future council election. So I can't control what anyone seeks to do as an independent.
No, but you wouldn't.
I'd be very
happen.
Absolutely not. And I'd be very outspoken, if that does go ahead. I mean, it remains to be seen.
You don't think he should run, is what I'm trying to get.
Of course not. Of course not. I mean, he hasn't either denied or confirmed that he will be running.
Should he have just stepped down from politics altogether with the findings of that report?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm very much, very clearly on record as saying how disgraceful it was that in the wake of an extensive inquiry, which we didn't even look, it looked at a certain number of cases. It didn't look at everything because it wasn't possible to look at everything. But, they took, I think it was, around 100 cases and looked, what happened under his reign. And, the shame of what happened under his watch, under his leadership, which he then, sought to denigrate even further by not accepting the findings of the report, was an absolute disgrace.
We've got about 60 seconds left. A quick word on dangerous dogs, because I know you campaigned heavily on this issue when you were a Labour MP.
Yes.
Do you think that these XL bully dogs now should actually be culled? those still in existence? Because we talked about the ban, but puppies are going to have, what, 10 to 15 years of life. We've had another man in London bitten so badly that he's gone into hospital. The owner can't be traced, apparently. What should be done, Luciana?
So I did have the very, very serious events happen in my constituency. I saw not one but two of my constituents die because of dangerous dogs, John Paul Massey and Louise Cahill, and as a result of which I worked very closely on this issue to see some changes come forward. So we've now got an increase in sentencing, but it's not enough. Let's be very clear, the majority of dog owners in this country are responsible, they look after their pets, they ensure that they are responsible when they go out and about, but for a very small minority that is not the case, and we have a duty to protect people when they're going about their business on the streets. We've also got a duty, I think, to protect our postal workers who are the subject of these attacks
compulsory
daily.
Muzzles, dog licences, culls on XL bullies, what would you advocate?
I was certainly persuaded by the case for dog licences, and we certainly see that very successfully in other countries. I think when it comes to these particular breeds, we have suffered in the past where you kind of identify one breed, and then there's variations of that breed, which means that you then can't hold dog owners to account when their dogs perpetrate attacks on other people. So I think looking at breed alone, we have to look much wider than that, but certainly there's too many examples already, very serious examples where people have lost their lives at the hands of these dogs, and I don't think the measures announced so far are going to be enough to tackle this very serious issue. Final
quick question. Are you going to stand for Labour again at the next general election?
No, I have no plans.
No plans. You've got other things outside of politics, which I know you're doing very well at.
I'm a busy mum of two small children.
But still going to be banging the drum for Labour?
Yeah, I came back into the Labour Party just a few months ago. I'm just a member. I'm not anything else. I come with no official hats on or responsibilities. But no, I see in Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves, and the rest of the front bench a team that is absolutely dedicated to making a difference in this country.
Luciana, thank you very much for joining me this morning.